For me, back in 2006, when Oblivion first released, the game was a glorious mess. I still remember glimpsing those first screenshots and getting swept up in the hype. I was actually pretty active on the Bethesda forums in those days, speculating and salivating over each new tidbit about the game which leaked out. So it's been rather amusing to me watching the hype train surrounding the shadow drop of the Oblivion remaster. My first Elder Scrolls game was Morrowind, which definitely captivated me. But despite preferring certain aspects of that title, the fact is that I put way more hours into Oblivion. Sure, the level scaling was broken, the dungeons were repetitive, you had that aggressive zoom in during dialogue, which you can toggle off now, and that highlighted those not so great looking NPCs and all 8 of their voice actors. And of course, there was all the bugs. When I call it a glorious mess, it might be easy to focus more on the mess than on the glory. Yet none of those flaws mattered all that much when I was lost deep in those lush forests, ignoring the main quest and forging an adventure all my own. The classic Elder Scrolls games were among the first titles for me, which were able to really evoke that sensation, transporting me to a world that begged to be explored for its own sake, irregardless of what happens next in this or that quest line. Today, there are plenty of other games that are able to lure you away with a, let me just see what's over that next hill, air of mystery. Breath of the Wild, Elden Ring, Stalker 2, all evoked that feeling for me. But even now, few if any experiences embody that spirit of exploration better than a good Bethesda game. There are also few experiences which give you the same staggering degree of interactivity. Being able to pick up and manipulate nearly every object on a given table or shelf, to read every book, open every drawer, munch on every morsel of food. And here, Oblivion marked a clear step forward from Morrowind, as those objects didn't just warp into your inventory, but had actual physics, allowing you to pick them up or toss them across the room. Other games just didn't do that kind of stuff. And so, while all that freedom brought with it plenty of glitches, I couldn't help but admire the sheer ambition behind a game like Oblivion. In most games at the time, you were lucky if the windows could be broken or the lights shot out. Invisible walls tended to be everywhere, rendering your supposedly agile hero helpless in the face of a small shrubbery or a 3-foot-high fence. Oblivion stumbled here and there, but the whole was greater than the sum of its parts, and even the jank was sometimes the good type of jankiness. The magic system, for instance, was rather crazy, allowing you to craft custom spells that could more or less break the game. But again, I didn't care, because discovering those exploits was just fun. Even save scumming, reloading a bazillion times to score the sigil stone I most wanted. Yes, it was kind of annoying, but I could look past all that. Now in 2025, however, I may be a little less forgiving when it comes to some of those janky elements. For some of these nearly 20-year-old bugs to still be in the game is a bit ridiculous. And a number of the fixes that we did get only fix things halfway. For instance, the level scaling for your character works a lot better, but the fact that unique items remain scaled to you was an immediate annoyance. This means that you can find some epic sword, let's call it the legendary blade of Dragonsbane, but if you found it at level 5, then by the time you're level 20, the average bandit in the woods is likely to have a sword more powerful than your supposedly legendary blade. I kind of hate that stuff. But thankfully, I wasn't alone in feeling that way, as one of the first mods to release already addresses this. As is usual for Bethesda games, you can count on the modding scene to smooth over most of the game's rough edges. But that only really helps if the base game is worth building upon. And I'm glad to say that it is. Sure, I could nitpick over this or that minor element of the visuals or the AI. You will totally still have those moments where you stealth kill an enemy, only for his comrades to either act like nothing happened or maybe reason, it must have been rats, while someone is lying there with an arrow through their neck. But honestly, some of those moments actually lend the game a certain charm. On the whole, things do both look and sound stunning. The new lighting adds a ton of atmosphere, and you'll hear a much broader variety of voices spouting those old familiar lines. The faces, while a big step up, can still be a bit inconsistent, and the remaster also goes with the cringy Type 1 or Type 2 options for body choices. That's a change you probably won't see a mod for, at least not on the major sites. But despite a few annoyances, I have to admit that this game really taps into my nostalgia vein. It's been years, but upon jumping back in, I quickly found myself rediscovering familiar threads of interwoven gameplay systems. I usually main a stealth character, so I'm going to need a good dagger. I think I'll go grab Mehrunes Razor. Oh, but if I don't want to lose that dagger's enchantment, I'm gonna need to recharge it with Soul Trap. How about I get the Soul Trap Sigil Stone and use it to enchant a decent bow? But oh yeah, I'm gonna need Azura's Star if I don't want to burn through 1,000,000 soul gems. And while getting that, it looks like I accidentally contracted vampirism. You know what? I think I'll go with it. But then, if I'm going to be a vampire, I should probably unlock Deep Scorn Hollow, and then I'll need several upgrades for that place. By the way, why is my prisoner sleeping while standing up? I can't bite his neck if he's like that. How is it that this glitch from the original game is still here? So it certainly has its issues. Many players will feel their patience tested right in that opening dungeon. But once it gets its hooks in you, Oblivion Remastered is very compelling. It had me doing that thing where I go to sleep, planning what items and upgrades I want to pursue when the morning dawns. After I offer Mass, of course. Nowadays, it's pretty rare for a game to hook me like that. Things are a little less compelling on the narrative front. Any sense of urgency tends to get lost when a game gives you this much freedom. But the core theme is interesting, putting you not in the shoes of the one person who can stop the Oblivion crisis, but rather in the shoes of someone who sets out to save that one person. It's a nice twist on the typical formula, and we are given some intriguing insights into the threat posed by the Oblivion Gates. In particular, there's a line by Mankar Camoran, cultic leader of the infamous Mythic Dawn, responsible for the Emperor's assassination. In one of his monologues, he says, "Yes, you understand now. Tamriel is just one more Daedric realm of Oblivion, long since lost to its prince when he was betrayed by those that served him. Lord Dagon cannot invade Tamriel, his birthright. He comes to liberate the occupied lands." Now, I'll leave it to the lore experts to debate over whether this claim is true. The Tamriel was itself once a plane of oblivion. And to be sure, the realm of Oblivion and the Christian conception of hell, despite appearances, these two things are quite different. But the implication here calls to mind a quote from St. Catherine of Siena, who said, "All the way to heaven is heaven," and to which later commentators have added, "And all the way to hell is hell." From the perspective of eternity, that is, of the fullness of time, in which all time is present in the eternal now. From that perspective, all of this earthly life is either part of heaven or part of hell. And if we stop and pay attention, we can often see glimpses of that in our present lives. I am no saint, but in my years I've met some pretty saintly people. They may not have material wealth or other comforts which our world tells us will bring happiness. Some religious sisters I've known come to mind. And yet they have a joy, an inner peace that is exceedingly rare. Likewise, I've known some very worldly people, some who were successful, some who were not, but a number of whom, regardless, have seriously struggled with simply finding a reason to keep living. So deep was the depression in which they found themselves. Some of you may be able to relate. In my previous video, reviewing and reflecting upon Ultra Kill, I got several comments from people wishing I delved deeper into the lore, with a few noting how God in that universe regretted that he ever created hell in the first place, how the concept of an infinite punishment meted out for a finite number of crimes, it just doesn't add up. A God who is okay with hell would seem to be more like Mehrunes Dagon and less like the Holy Trinity. To this contention, allow me to offer two thoughts. The first is that the gravity of a crime can differ depending on who I commit it against. If I'm at a cafe and somebody steals my iPhone, and I respond by seizing them and cutting off their hands, I clearly have done wrong. The punishment is disproportionate to the crime. If it's a starving person who steals a loaf of bread, and I respond in the same brutal way, again, I have done wrong. But now my sin is even worse, even more disproportionate. And if the person merely asks me for a slice of bread, and my reaction is the same, then obviously my sin is extremely grave. The more innocent the victim, the worse the crime. And well, God is infinitely innocent, infinitely pure and good. So this principle of proportionate justice, it factors into the logic of hell. But personally, it's this next point that I find more persuasive. There's a scene in my afterlife adventure novel in which my dead atheist and his angelic defense attorney are sitting at a bar, and the angel asks, "Who do you think Satan hates the most?" "Well, obviously it must be God," responds the protagonist. But that's the wrong answer. The person who Satan hates the most is Satan. The damned, in other words, are self-loathing. In spite of God's great mercy, forgiveness is something they could never accept, for they are so consumed by self-hatred that they wish nothing good for themselves. And again, we sadly see a preview of this here in this earthly life. For many people feel unable to forgive themselves. That feeling, it may only be deepened when we stand before the just judge, and all our excuses, all biases are stripped away. We see our faults with perfect clarity. Will you still be able to love yourself? Perhaps the whole business of closing shut the jaws of oblivion is something we first need to carry out in our hearts. May we embrace God's merciful love here and now, while there is still time. And that's all I've got for today. May you go with God, may you like and subscribe, and may we pray for one another until we meet again.